Thank you for being here to the presentation Local Variation in the Labour Market Impact of COVID-19. So this is joint work with Richard Dorset, and this work was funded by the Office for National Statistics in the context of ESCoE project. So we will be focusing on the local ability of unemployed and vacancy to be matched during the crisis, and we'll focus on two moments. So first, the initial shock, so April to June 2020, and then 1 year later to see a more long-lasting impact of the crisis. So we ask, what is the impact of pre-pandemic health of local labor markets on the ability of unemployed and vacancies to match during the COVID crisis? So by pre-pandemic health, we mean inefficient labor market in the sense that there is a high number of vacancies, but at the same time, a high number of unemployed. So this can happen because of a high mismatch between unemployed and vacancy. So the skilled required for the vacancy are not the one supplied by the unemployed. It can also be because there is a sustained high separation rate. So if there is continuously a lot of job ending, and so people either flowing towards unemployment or worker moving, job filling, new creating vacancy, you can have high unemployment even though the vacancy rate is high. And this is not necessarily bad. So you can have a high separation rate. This is also linked to high productivity of job. So if low productive job ends and are replaced by high vacancy, by higher productive ones, you get an increase in work productivity. But that still means that the job-to-job transition take the new vacancy, and those who are unemployed maybe can lack access to join back the labor market. We will focus on two dimensions, geographic dimension, the regional divide and rural-urban divide. So the main motivation is to understand the nature of UK spatial disparities. So it is still a very hot topic with a lot of inequality, geographical inequality, health inequality, pay inequality, education attainment. So London and the South East are favored, coastal area and urban towns more disadvantaged. But also you have often larger disparities within areas and between them. And also at the same time as the leveling up paper, the Overman and Su paper show that over time, those disparities are persistent but smaller than 20 years ago. And it's largely explained by the concentration of high-skilled workers. So what we do, first we document which areas have pre-pandemic more difficulty to match vacancies and unemployment. So unemployed people, is it more the regional dimension that matters, or is it more the urban-rural dimension? And to already introduce notation, alpha A will be the difficulty to match vacancies and unemployed pre-pandemic. So we make a novel use of the Adzuna vacancy data for this to characterize the efficiency of local labor markets. And then we will assess its impact on the severity of the initial shock and the lasting effect of the crisis. We use also recall variables from the quarterly LFS to allow for change. So then some of the literature. Early in the pandemic, McCurdy and Hostin documented that in areas where you already had a high unemployment rate, the unemployment rate increased more. Also, areas more reliant on traditional industries were more affected. You had also difference in the change in vacancies locally, which was documented by Cockett and Wilson. So also more shut down sector were more affected. Office work, hospitality, leisure, tourism, and aviation. You also had Rudy, who documented that if you lifted restriction locally, you see a small increase in the number of adverts. And finally, the work from home policy changed the geography of jobs. So especially service job, if you go to a restaurant now, you go close to where you live and not close to where you work. And larger cities, which have more distance between work and job location, were more affected because of that policy. So last, to estimate the difficulties of vacancies and unemployed to match, we will estimate a spatial bearing curve, and Vol and Zoega in 2002 did it focusing on UK region. So the rest of the talk will be structured as follow. First, I will present the main measures. So unemployment, vacancies, and also a pre-pandemic measure of difficulty to match U and V. Then I will present the econometric result, and then I will focus on mismatch as a potential explanation of our result. So the first set of measures, so our unit of analysis is local labor market, self-contained local market where people work and live, it's the purpose, but we didn't have access to travel to work area. So we base our analysis on local authority district, but we group them when they are in a single travel to work area. So clearly, if you are in Camden or in Islington, you take part of the same local labor market. To measure unemployed people, we use claimant counts from NUMIS, which is both people claiming job seekers allowance and people in universal credit who are required to look for work and to be available to work. We use weekly Azuna vacancies from 2018 onwards, deduplicated and kindly supplied by ONS. We average them over quarter to match the LFS structure. And finally, we will normalize those numbers with the active population, which is payroll employee plus the claimant count. So we are not including the self-employed from that number. Okay, so the first descriptive statistics. So here you have the unemployment rate on the x-axis, vacancy rate on the y-axis for 4 years, each time in the April-June quarter. And you see that first, already between 2018 and 2019, you have a shift to the right. So you see that for a given of vacancies, the unemployment rate was already higher. So that seems harder to match vacancies and unemployed. Then in April-June 2020, you see that vacancies are really down, but there is a high variation in employment rate. Okay, higher for everybody that in the previous year, but still high variation. And in 2021, you have a rebound of vacancies, but you see that the unemployment rate remains relatively high, almost the same as in 2020. And why might this be the case? So either there is an increase in the mismatch between unemployed and vacancies, as well as, for example, this high demand for truck drivers, and maybe the unemployed had not these skills. Or you had a sustained flow towards unemployment which makes that even if people were matching, then new unemployed people came in the market. Okay, so now this is claimant counts and vacancies per inhabitants relative to the first quarter of 2018, and it's the average across local labor markets within region. You see quite some variation. You see that first, before the crisis and almost everywhere, you already had a trend where claimant counts were increasing and vacancies were decreasing. But then the change in claimant counts and vacancies differed. So you have you multiply almost by 4 in the southeast London. You multiply by less in the northeast, but the base was higher. You see less difference in the vacancies, as was documented already. See that the southeast and London is a little bit down by the second quarter of 2021, but the change in market tightness is driven by the claimant counts. So if we look at the same, but now for the urban-rural divide, you see that the increase in claimant counts was higher in rural areas, but then it decreased more rapidly. Then here it was maybe a little bit, the increase was a little bit lower, but it still increased, and then it was more a flat relationship. Okay, so now this is our main measure and the last measure I will present. So pre-pandemic difficulties of matching vacancies to unemployed, alpha A. So our base are very simple and standard Beveridge curve. So this is the number of match on the market, which depends on the number of unemployed, number of vacancy in a Cobb-Douglas fashion. So there is constant returns to scale. And you have an efficiency parameter, which tells you how good you are at matching unemployed and vacancies. Now you divide by the active population to have rates, and you assume equilibrium. We will estimate here pre-pandemic, so with the years 2018 and 2019, sorry. So in equilibrium, the number of match in the market is equal to the number of the separation, so the separation rate in the labor market, so that the number of jobs remain the same. And you have, this depends from the same, but per active population. So now if you assume that the separation rate is constant, you can estimate this is the log of unemployment at time t, is equal to this alpha A, which is the pre-pandemic difficulties of matching V to U, plus beta times the log of the vacancy rate plus an error term. So you see that this alpha A negatively depends on the efficiency parameter. So the higher the AA, the lower will be this alpha A, and the higher the separation rate, the higher will be the alpha A. So the higher the alpha A, the more inefficient the local market at matching vacancies and unemployed. So we estimate beta to be around 0.5. So that means that alpha A is approximately equal to the log of the vacancies plus the log of the unemployed. So you see that it's when unemployed rate is high, despite vacancies also being high. And here a high alpha A is compatible with a high inequality in labor market access in a dynamic market. So as I said earlier, you can have a very high turnover dynamic market where low productive job are destroyed and replaced by high productive job. So with a high separation rate. And then all the new vacancies on the markets might be taken by job-to-job transition, and because it's harder, it's easier for them to get new job, and people already unemployed might have more trouble to get to a new job. So it's compatible with a high inequality market. Okay, so here documented the alpha A. So remember, high alpha A is inefficient market. So you see, so two things I want to show. First, you see a really strong gradient with density. So if you're a rural area, you have a more match in the labor markets given the market tightness. And when you go to denser area, you have a lower efficiency in that. And also you see that in the Northeast, wherever you are, you tend to have a lower efficiency. So it's above average inefficiency alpha. Okay, so now for the econometric analysis, we will use 2 quarters in April, June 2020 and April, June 2021. We control for employment 1 year earlier so that we can control for employment history. And we'll have a multinomial logic to estimate the effect of alpha A on individual probability to be employed, unemployed, or inactive. We do this given the market tightness. So here you see the results. So separately for male and female. So first you see the effect of year 2021, which can be interpreted as an overall recovering variable. So because you compare 2020 with 2021, and you see that it's negative. So unemployed is lower everywhere. 1 year after the beginning of the crisis. And also inactivity for male is lower everywhere. For female, unemployed is non-significant, but inactivity is also significant. So in 2021, compared to 2020, the probability to be inactive for female decreases. Okay, now the local change in market tightness. So number of local vacancies divided by number of local claimant counts is not significant. So it's probably more the overall change in market tightness, which does impact the probability to be unemployed, but through that year coefficient. And now, if you go to that main parameter of interest, so the difficulty, pre-pandemic difficulty to match unemployed and vacancies, you see that for the 2 years, it's not significant for male, but it's significant for female. So in both 2020 and 2021, the probability to be inactive for female was larger in local labor market with more difficulty to match unemployed and vacancy pre-pandemic. And this is the recovery effect 1 year later, even though the pandemic was still there. But you see that for male, it was harder. So the decrease in the unemployment rate was lower in areas which had more difficulty to match unemployed and vacancy pre-pandemic. So the disadvantage of pre-pandemic disadvantage was further strengthened. Okay, so now some estimated probability in 2020, just to have a sense of the magnitude of the local difference. So for male, it's unemployment which is strongest. So you see that in very high efficient area, you had a 2.2% estimated probability given the control to be unemployed, and in high inefficient area, you had a 3.8% probability to be unemployed. For female, the changes are lower everywhere across area, but it's more for inactive with still a high inactivity rate, 22% of being inactive in efficient markets and 2.3 probability of being inactive in inefficient market. So now we will look at the as skill mismatch as a potential explanation behind that result for men, especially. So this is very experimental. We use the sectors of Aduna categories converted to 2-digit SIC 07 codes. So we hadn't access to the full Aduna job posting, just the categories. So we classified it depending on the name and also on the internet website in which industry it falls. So categories, Aduna categories are usually industries. And for the unemployed, we here rely on the LFS ILO unemployed. And we classify them according to previous employment in the 2-digit SIC 07 codes. So here the sample size is lower than for the claimant counts. And also we do not take into account first-time unemployed, so young worker, for instance, who have not worked before. And then we classified those 2-digit industries into 2 groups. So the industry where you need, according to LFS, where more than 50% of the workers hold a degree, and industry where less than 50% hold a degree. So then we compute the share of vacancies and unemployed in each industries in the group local authorities. And then we average across region and area type. So these are the results. So we know that more inefficient market here in the region were the Northeast and London. So you have the share of vacancies in non-degree industry and the share of unemployed in non-degree industry relative to the first quarter in 2018. So you see that in the North, Yorkshire, you have a more pronounced increase in the share of vacancies in non-degree industry that's elsewhere, but in the Southeast also quite a high increase. So we see that in London, Eastern, West Midlands, the proportion of vacancies in non-degree industry increased less. And the share of unemployed is a bit more noisy, but you still see some difference. The share of unemployed decrease in some area, but in other it stayed relatively flat. Okay, and so now the same for the rural-urban divide. So yeah, so everywhere the share of unemployed in non-degree industry is higher than the share of vacancies in non-degree industry. So when you have share of vacancies going up and unemployed going down, you have a reduction in the mismatch between non-degree and degree industry. So you see that here this mismatch is decreasing. The share of vacancies in non-degree industry is highest in many rural areas and also for all less urbanized area, but is less in urban with conurbation. And at the same time, you tend to have a stronger decrease in the share of unemployed in non-degree industry. Here you have not so many local authorities, so it's maybe less reliable. But yeah, urban with major conurbation is quite flat, so you clearly have a smaller decrease in the skill mismatch here. Note that the LFS unemployed, which we use for this, in those data you don't see as much pronounced the increase in unemployed as you would see in the claimant counts, so that this might also affect the results. Okay, so it's the end of my presentation. So to conclude, employment recovery was harder for men in areas with more difficult matching of unemployed and vacancy pre-pandemic, given the control. And you have no local variation for women in April-June 2021 compared to April-June 2020. So you're more unlikely to be inactive in more difficult markets, but both in the beginning of the crisis and then. And the smaller decrease in industry skill mismatch in London and urban with minor conurbation might be part of why you have unemployment did not decrease as much, even though vacancies recovered, but it's not the case for the Northeast, or we don't see this smaller decrease in industry mismatch there as much. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. Thanks very much for your presentation. You've only taken half an hour, so we have ample time for questions. There are already 2 questions in the chat, but I think we do really have time also for more questions. So feel free to just drop a question into the Q&A, and then we will go through them one by one. So if everybody could just, I'll call on somebody, and if they could share their video and then introduce themselves and ask the question. So first question is from Stephen Millard. Could you perhaps share your screen or your video and ask your question?
Okay, I'm struggling to share my screen, my video, but
right.
I hope you can hear me.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, it was just about the way you estimated mismatch. So normally, you wrote down the matching equation that says the number of matches depends on unemployed and vacancies and the degree of matching efficiency. And my question, although I think I know the answer, equation, yeah, that's it. So the equation at the top, but my question was, why not estimate that one directly by region, rather than assume that matches were constant over the period?
So we'll have to have a separation rate, a measure of separation rate. But yeah, if we had the measure of separation rate, then I think we could, especially with HMRC data, we wouldn't need that assumption.
Okay, thank you.
Did I answer?
Yeah. I thought it was probably a data thing, that you just didn't have the flows. The data on flows by region, which you would need, but if you
we don't have it here, but we could construct it from elsewhere.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you can construct it, that's probably better than to just assume they're constant. That was the comment. Thanks.
And so they are varying by area, so we could really be able to distinguish between the separation rate and the efficiency.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I've just been told people are not able actually to share their screen, so that that was the problem. Tom Wagstaff, you had two questions, so feel free to ask Jessica.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. My general one was, were you surprised to see that, if I interpret the results right, rural labour markets seem to be more efficient? Because when I think of cities and agglomeration economies, often sort of improved matching is one of the reasons you think it's a good idea to get together in a city, that it should be easier to find people with the exact skill you need.
Yeah. So apparently in the literature I saw, for example, from Petrangolo, you see she could not reject the hypothesis of constant return to scales. Surprisingly, she is looking for it more often. But what she says is that, or what I read is that you have better matches, but the time it gets to have to get a match is about the same. But then the pooling effect of large markets can be through this separation rate again. So if you have a higher separation rate, which is documented in large cities, you have a higher separation rate, then you might have a higher efficiency parameter here, even if overall you don't necessarily see. But then you have this high turnover where the low productivity job gets destroyed and the high productivity jobs replace them. And so even though you have about the same level of unemployment, you have a lot more of job-to-job transitions, which still means that it's easier to match in large cities.
I see. So the labour market's more efficient because it's people moving from one job to the other.
Yes.
Rather than helping unemployed people. That makes sense.
But then it depends where, because I guess in the UK, unemployment rate is increasing in city size. But I read that elsewhere it's not everywhere the case. So you might also have a country-specific context. But yeah.
And Tom, you also had a second question, I think, on the area of fixed effects.
Yeah, this is a clarification question. So forgive me, I'm not familiar with the beverage curve you're estimating. But when you showed the results, I think you had this alpha is basically substituted by an area fixed effect, and then you also interacted it on calendar year 2021, like a categorical variable for that. And I wondered why you did that interaction. And if you left it out, would you just see a significant fixed effect across the males and females?
The same between, you're asking between about the difference between male and females, or just why to have the interaction?
Well, sorry, first question is why the interaction. I guess I was just interested because I thought, oh, it's interesting that the fixed effect alone looks significant for female inactivity, and then the interacted one significant on male unemployment.
So the interaction was to make the distinction between how hit you were at the beginning of the crisis and then your ability to recover. So here overall across the 2 years, you don't have alpha A doesn't really matter significantly, but in the recovery phase or in the second stage of the crisis, you have an impact. Whereas for female, you have an impact in both years, but not specifically in the recovery phase. And yeah, I have to admit we had to dig in deeper to really understand the difference between males and females here.
No, that was really helpful. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, a question that also interests me a lot is about working from home, and Michael Andrew Nolan asked a question about that. Could you open your mic, Michael?
Hi. Yeah, I've got a bit of a dodgy internet connection, so I thought a bit. Yeah, it was it's kind of a more general question, I suppose, but with more working from home going on, to what extent should local labour market skill matches matter less in the future? You know, because obviously you see these pictures showing a sort of move, a divergence between U and V, but there's obviously a question now as to whether matching up all the skills locally is really the thing that we're going to need so much in the future. And I suppose, you know, pre-pandemic versus what we get coming out of it, I guess is a major distinction there. Do you have any sort of views on that, and even how it might influence some of the parameters in your model?
Jessica, could I just also add to that? Because I think it was Richard Baldwin in a globalization book that already predicted kind of a telemigration wave, whereby basically you would be working in a different country. You know, you would actually migrate during the day virtually, and it seems as if the pandemic must have sped up that development internationally, but also nationally. So, you know, to what extent are people that work in the City of London actually moving to, I don't know, the northeast, so to speak, to fill up a vacancy in the city, but actually live in the north, for example? So I guess this is all part of the same question, but it seems intriguing that the mismatch no longer might not apply for at least a part of the labor market.
So the definition of local labor market might be changed. So my sense is that it's not going to, local labor market are not going to vanish completely. So it will still matter where you are, where you live to find a vacancy locally. So if informal contact and local knowledge is helping to get a job, which probably does, even though maybe this changed during the pandemic, but so if informal knowledge and contact still matter, local labor market will remain. But if people get to this hybrid way of working, where most of the time you work from home, even though you meet people still sometimes, local labor market might get bigger. So when you construct the travel to work area, so this self-contained labor market where most of the people work and live there, those areas might get bigger, larger, even though I suspect also that the size of this local labor market might change if you have a degree and you're able to working remotely and not. So now already, actually, if you see the commute patterns, you commute much longer distance if you have a degree than not. So this might be accentuated with the crisis, this difference. But I don't think that local labor market will disappear because of informal knowledge and relationships, which was so much missing, at least to me during this pandemic.
Yeah. Okay. Are there any statistics on this kind of the people that work 100% virtually, or basically the jobs that have been totally disconnected from a locality? Or
yeah, I know only anecdotal evidence, but that's true that in the informatics sector it has, at least during the pandemic. But
okay.
No, I don't. There's probably some measures on it, but I think it's intuitively. But I think informality, even if the informatics sector will still matter,
Yeah.
Like if you have a question and you have just somebody in the same room and you can just ask, or even you can listen to a conversation without asking and learning something, without even having first thought that you could learn something.
Yeah.
I think this will not disappear, but it's only intuition and anecdotal.
Okay. Thanks. And Jorge Duran, you had 2 questions.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
No, it's at some point I had a hard time to follow the strategy, and I didn't understand. I'm very interested in the results in slide 15, and in particular in the gender differences. But I would like to understand these probabilities. These are probabilities conditional on what?
So they are conditional on
in 15.
Yeah, they have the same set of conditionality as slide 14.
Ah, okay.
So it's characteristics, history, employment history. So the fact that female and male have different history or controlled for, and it's conditional on local labor market tightness.
Ah, okay. Now I understand. Yes, and yeah, there seem to be more differences across genders than across matching efficiency, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, especially in the participation rate, but unemployment. Yeah, unemployment is less the case. Unemployment is really a little bit more for men the matching efficiency which matters.
Okay. Yes. Exactly. Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay. There don't seem to be any other questions in the Q&A. Feel free to pop a question in there, or alternative, you could also just raise your hand in the raise your hand function. Any last? Or the raise your hand doesn't work apparently, so Q&A is the area to go. Okay. Well, I think it was very clear, Jessica. Do you also plan to, I guess, repeat this study and update it with the 2022 data once they are available? And are you expecting any differences?
So updating the data might be difficult.
Yeah, but in future, yeah.
So now that we are really more outside of the crisis, it will be also really interesting to have April, June 2022, because 2021 was the ongoing of the crisis, but it was not as much, even though the pandemic is not over and we don't have to do as if it was over, but it's mostly over. So I think it was still in crisis mode, the 2021 dummy, whereas if we could do it in 2022, it would be more to see what will last after the crisis, even though to reach an equilibrium, which still take time probably.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, well, thanks a lot, Jessica. I don't think there's any remaining questions. So thanks very much for the presentation and also for all the questions from the audience. There will be a recording of this session, which will be put online. So if you want to refer to your colleagues, that will be available in future. Next lecture will be in 2 weeks on March 24th by Daniel Rock. Also a labor market paper, and Daniel Rock is from the University of Pennsylvania. So with that, I'd like to thank everybody for their attendance and thank Jessica in particular for her presentation. Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye. Thank you.